Imagine this, gas lines stretching around the corner, frustration mounting as you wait your turn, only to hear, "No gas today." Sounds like a nightmare, right? Well, in 1973, that was the new normal for millions in the United States. The country woke up from what you could call an energy innocence, a time when oil was cheap, plentiful, and nobody worried too much about where it came from or what might happen if those supplies got cut off. But then, all of a sudden, boom, the price of oil jumped from about $3 a barrel to almost $12, shaking the nation and the entire global economy to the core. So, how did this happen and why should you care? It all started with a mix of political events far away in the Middle East and the emergence of a new kind of economic weapon wielded by the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, or OPEC. When OPEC decided to stop pumping oil to certain countries, including the big guy on the block, the United States, the ripple effects were immediate. Gasoline prices doubled, then tripled, and the scarcity led to rationing, long waits at gas stations, and a real fear of what was coming next. For a country used to its abundance, the embargo was a rude awakening. You might wonder, was this just a silly political spat? Or a lesson I could still learn from today? Well, the embargo wasn't just about oil prices increasing. It forced America and the world to rethink energy security entirely. The crisis cast a spotlight on just how dependent the ways on foreign oil, especially from politically unstable regions. Suddenly, the comfortable lifestyle many took for granted seemed fragile and maybe even at risk. And here's the kicker, the embargo caused a deep economic shake that led to inflation, a slowdown in economic growth, and job losses. Prices of everyday goods climbed because transportation and manufacturing costs soared. If you think about it, every time gas prices shoot up nowadays, you're living a mini version of that shock. But in 1973, this was a full-blown economic earthquake. The government scrambled to respond with regulations, rationing, and a push for more domestic energy production. It was clear, the old way of taking energy for granted was over. Now you might be asking, what exactly triggered this embargo and why aimed specifically at the US? The backstory involves the Yom Kippur War, where Arab nations and Israel clashed. They had backed Israel, so OPEC's Arab members used oil as a political tool, their weapon, to pressure the into changing its stance. This wasn't just economics, it was geopolitics playing out with barrels of oil as ammunition. But here's a little twist to keep in mind. The embargo itself wasn't the only factor. They had complicated regulations that made it hard to get oil where it was needed most. Plus, the domestic oil production was already declining, and the country had become increasingly reliant on imports. It was like a perfect storm brewing under the surface that the embargo just brought sharply into focus. By the time the embargo officially lifted in early 1974, the price of oil had essentially quadrupled. It wasn't just about numbers, though. The psychological impact was huge. Americans suddenly saw energy as vulnerable, and this fear drove changes in policy and behavior. Every aspect of life touched by energy, from heating homes to filling cars, felt the sting. It showed the world just how interconnected politics, economics, and energy really are. And what about the gas lines? They became iconic symbols of the crisis. People waited for hours just to fill up a few gallons. Tensions ran high. There were even reports of scuffles and fights breaking out. It was a mess, no doubt. But it forced a reckoning. How to balance energy needs with geopolitical realities and how to avoid such a shock down the road. Ultimately, the 1973 oil embargo was a wake-up call. It ended an era of cheap and easy energy and introduced a new reality where global events in the Middle East could hit you right where it hurts, in your wallet and your daily life. So next time you're stuck in a long gas line or reel at a sudden price hike, remember, this was the moment the world started paying serious attention to energy security. And trust me, the ripple effects of those months still echo in every barrel of oil traded today. So here's the deal. Before OPEC became the heavyweight champ in the oil world, the market was dominated by what were called the Seven Sisters. These were massive multinational oil companies who basically controlled the production, refining, and pricing of oil across the globe. The oil-producing countries, they were mostly in the driver's seat in terms of supply, but had very little say in the money game. But all that was about to change. In 1960, 5 countries, Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, Iran, Iraq, and Kuwait decided they'd had enough of being sidelined. They met secretly in Baghdad and birthed the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, or OPEC for short, to protect their interests and take the power back. Let me break down why this was such a big deal. The oil companies at the time set posted prices for oil, which literally dictated the global price, with little input from the countries actually producing the stuff. When the Seven Sisters cut these prices, the oil nations felt the pinch in their national revenues. Think of it like this: you own a gold mine, but someone else decides the price of gold and you barely see the profits. By banding together, OPEC members aimed to control production levels and influence prices collectively, turning that system on its head. It was a bold move, a kind of cartel to face off against another cartel. Fast forward to the early 1970s, and the wheels were in motion to use this newfound muscle. The Yom Kippur War between Arab countries and Israel in 1973 provided the perfect storm. OPEC's Arab members reacted to Western support of Israel by slashing deliveries and slapping an embargo on oil exports to the and its allies. The shock was immediate. Prices exploded, causing chaos in economies that had grown complacent on cheap energy. OPEC was no longer just an idea or a council. It had become a global power player, reshaping the energy landscape. You might be wondering how this went down so fast. Well, it's not just political muscle, but also strategy. By limiting how much oil they pumped and who got it, OPEC created artificial scarcity. Prices shot up from about $3 per barrel to nearly $12, a fourfold increase. Imagine what that did to your gas bill today. But there's more. This surge wasn't just a temporary price spike. It signaled a long-term shift in how energy would be priced and controlled, triggering a scramble for energy independence in many countries. The embargo exposed a lot of weak spots in Western economies, especially in the economic growth slowed, inflation soared, and energy rationing became a way of life. Long gas lines, slower industrial production, and a big shift in global power dynamics followed. For OPEC members, this was a breakthrough moment. They went from being seen as mere suppliers to key geopolitical actors. The days when they took whatever price was handed to them were over. But OPEC's story isn't just a tale of political posturing, it's also about economics. As producers coordinated output, they gained the power to influence prices upwards, affecting everything from inflation rates in your country to the balance of trade between nations. This wasn't just about money flowing to oil kingdoms, it was about the ripple effects on consumers, businesses, and governments everywhere. Prices at the pump became a new economic metric to watch closely. Of course, the rise of OPEC created winners and losers. Oil exporting nations saw a boom in revenues, enabling investments in infrastructure and development. But for oil importing countries, especially the in Western Europe, the embargo forced painful adjustments. Industries relying on cheap energy felt the pinch, inflation hit consumer wallets, and governments scrambled for solutions. It wasn't just economics, it was a crisis of confidence and resilience. Interestingly, not all OPEC members always saw eye to eye. The organization faced internal tensions between countries with different production goals and political visions. Plus, discoveries of new oil fields outside OPEC, like in Alaska or the North Sea, complicated the cartel's control over the market. But despite these challenges, OPEC's influence only grew, becoming a key player in the world economy and energy politics. So, the 1970s marked the moment when OPEC flexed its muscles for real. Their power play wasn't just about a single embargo or price spike, it was the start of a new era where oil-producing countries would claim their share of the global pie and shape the world's energy future. And you still feel the aftershocks of that power shift every time you check the price of gas or hear about global energy politics. Now that you know how OPEC rose to dominance and the big moves in 1973, get ready because we're about to dive into how that led straight to one of the most frustrating economic combos out there, stagflation. Ready to see how rising prices and falling growth can wreck an economy? Stay tuned. Alright, buckle up because we're about to dive into one of the trickiest economic monsters ever, stagflation. Now, if you've never heard the term, it means the economy is stuck in a weird spot where inflation is raging, growth has stalled, and unemployment is going through the roof, all at the same time. If you think about it, that's super frustrating because usually inflation and unemployment tend to go in opposite directions. But during the 1970s, thanks to oil shocks and some policy missteps, these problems collided like a perfect storm. Let's break this down in a way that sticks. Imagine your paycheck isn't keeping up with rising prices, so your purchasing power shrinks. At the same time, jobs are harder to find because businesses aren't growing or are even shrinking. That's exactly what stagflation is. A painful combo where your money doesn't go as far, but job opportunities dry up. For regular folks like you and me, it means tightening belts and feeling uncertainty in the air, not just about what you pay at the pump, but rents, groceries, and pretty much everything. So, how did the 1970s get into such a mess? It wasn't just the oil embargo driving prices up, though that was a massive trigger. They had already left the gold standard in 1971, which removed a key constraint on money supply growth. Governments and central banks were pumping money into the system to keep things afloat, but it backfired. Instead of stimulating growth, this cash infusion stoked inflation without creating jobs. And then add the price controls and wage freezes from Nixon's administration, which only delayed the inevitable surge in prices. When OPEC raised oil prices massively in 1973, production costs soared for almost every industry. Transportation, manufacturing, even agriculture felt the hit because energy is a building block for all these sectors. The cost-push inflation created by higher oil prices meant businesses either raised prices or took hits on profits. Consumers then demanded wage increases to keep up, sparking what economists call a wage price spiral. One feeds the other, and neither stops without pain. But there's more to this story. Traditional economic theories, like the Phillips curve, predicted that inflation and unemployment wouldn't rise together. Policymakers were caught off guard because no one expected that raising interest rates to cool inflation would also choke growth and increase joblessness. It was like trying to steer a car on ice. Step too hard on the brakes and you skid. That's why the 1970s stagflation was such a headache for economists. Standard tools seemed useless or even harmful. What made stagflation particularly vicious was how it shifted global economic thinking. Suddenly, the Keynesian ideas that government spending and demand management could fix every downturn were questioned. New schools of thought like monetarism and supply-side economics gained traction, arguing for tighter monetary policies and tax cuts to encourage production. But applying these ideas was politically tricky, and the pain of adjusting was felt everywhere, from the factory floor to family budgets. You may have noticed that the 1970s also saw a shift in currency systems as the Bretton Woods Agreement unraveled. This change meant currencies floated freely and commodities, especially oil and gold, became much more volatile. So, stagflation was not just about oil prices, but also about a broader economic transition. For countries relying heavily on imports, the weaker dollar and unpredictable exchange rates added to the inflationary pressures. Now think about the broader social impact. With rising unemployment, especially among younger and less skilled workers, many people felt left behind. Wage stagnation hit the middle and working classes hard, while prices for essentials kept climbing. The combined effect led to social unrest and a loss of faith in economic institutions. And all this pressure made it clear that energy was not just a commodity, but a central pillar of economic stability and security. So, when you hear about inflation today, or worry about growth slowing down, remember the stagflation nightmare from the past. It showed us that economies can get stuck in a bind where fixing one problem worsens another. Understanding this helps explain why central banks are so careful today with interest rates and why energy prices remain a key watchpoint. The 1970s stagflation was a tough lesson, but one that still resonates when the price of oil spikes or inflation heats up. Ready for the next roller coaster? Because right after this mess, the world faced a second oil shock, triggered by the 1979 Iranian Revolution, and trust me, things were about to get even more intense. But let's take a pause here and digest the stagflation beast before diving back in. Just when you thought the oil storm from 1973 had passed, bam, here comes round two in 1979 with the Iranian Revolution lighting the fuse. Picture this: Iran, a key OPEC player and major oil supplier, suddenly plunges into chaos as the Shah is overthrown and Ayatollah Khomeini takes the reins. Oil production there crashes from about 6 million barrels a day down to barely 1.5 million due to strikes and political turmoil. You're left wondering, could a revolution halfway around the world really yank the rug out from under your daily drive again? Let's unpack what made this such a powder keg. By late 1978, massive strikes hit Iran's oil fields, crippling output right before the revolution exploded in full force. The world lost around 4 to 5% of global supply net, even as other producers tried to ramp up. But panic set in hard. Buyers hoarded crude fearing worse to come, which doubled the shortage's impact and sent spot market prices soaring to $50 a barrel. Suddenly, oil jumped from $13 to $34 in just a year, hitting economies still reeling from the first shock. Ever ask yourself why this felt even scarier than the embargo? Unlike the targeted political ban of '73, this was pure supply disruption from internal meltdown, sparking fears it could spread across the region. The US, already twitchy from the hostage crisis starting November 4th when militants seized the embassy, saw gas lines return worse than before. Refineries geared for Iranian crude struggled with substitutes, deepening shortages despite some deregulation efforts. It was like the universe saying, nope, you're not done learning about energy vulnerability yet. Now, think about the wage price spiral kicking back into gear. Higher oil costs rippled through everything: trucking, plastics, even food production since farming guzzles fuel. Inflation, that sneaky thief, picked up speed again while growth stalled under the weight. Central banks hiked rates to fight it, but that just squeezed jobs harder. For folks like you, it meant belts tightening on groceries and heat while job hunts got tougher. Classic stagflation reloaded. But here's where it gets geopolitically juicy. The revolution shifted alliances big time. Iran, once an ally under the Shah, flipped to anti-Western hostility, cozying up to no one in the oil club. OPEC tried coordinating cuts, but cheating members and surging non-OPEC output, like from the North Sea, complicated things. Saudi Arabia pumped record levels temporarily, hitting 12.85 million barrels one day, yet prices still rocketed on fear alone. Pause and think. Doesn't this sound eerily like how rumors today spike crypto or stock volatility? The panic buying. Oh man, that amplified everything. Traders stockpiled not just for now, but betting on endless shortages, turning a manageable dip into a frenzy. Spot markets, once a tiny side gig at 8% of trade, exploded as long-term contracts crumbled under pressure. Buyers ditched fixed deals for whatever they could grab at any price, birthing the modern oil trading chaos we know. You're probably nodding, recognizing how fear still drives markets when supply whispers turn to shouts. Socially, it was rough. Gas rationing odd-even days based on license plates, fights at pumps, and Carter's approval tanking amid hostages and lines. Deregulation started phasing in April 1979, letting prices float more, which eventually boosted domestic output from places like Prudhoe Bay. But short-term? Pure pain, with independent refiners begging for allocations since they couldn't afford spot crude. This mess exposed how regulations could worsen natural shocks, paving the way for Reagan's full repeal. Zoom out, and you see lasting scars. The second shock cemented energy as national security, spurring strategic reserves worldwide. Non-OPEC supply surged 5.6 million barrels daily by the mid-80s, forcing OPEC to slash quotas to 18 million from 31. Saudi swing producer dreams busted as quota cheats flooded markets cheap. For you today, it begs the question, with renewables rising and EVs charging ahead, are we finally breaking free from these oil roller coasters or just waiting for the next twist? This Iranian ignite didn't just hike prices, it redefined global energy chess. From spot market dominance to production rushes outside cartels, the board flipped forever. Governments scrambled for alternatives, consumers conserved like never before, and investors eyed commodities warily. So next time tensions brew in oil lands, remember 1979, your pump prices might tremble again before you know it. Hang tight, because up next, we unpack how these double whammies redrew geopolitical maps from Carter's doctrine to alliance shuffles. Vale, get comfy as the power plays unfold. Okay, now that you've felt the double punch of those oil shocks, let's zoom out to see how they redrew the global power map like a massive earthquake. Countries scrambled to rethink alliances, build defenses, and chase new energy plays because no one wanted to be caught pants down again. Think about it. The US, once comfy with cheap Middle East oil, suddenly faced the reality that friends could turn foes overnight. You're probably asking yourself, could today's tensions in the oil patch do the same to your investments or daily fuel costs? Carter stepped up with his famous 1980 doctrine, basically declaring any threat to Persian Gulf oil a direct assault on Uncle Sam's interests. This wasn't just talk. It paved the way for military buildups and the rapid deployment force to protect sea lanes and key producers. Europe, hit hard by shortages, ditched their old reliance on Soviet gas streams and hunted alternatives like North Sea oil and Algerian pipelines. Saudi Arabia, playing both sides, boosted production to stabilize markets but demanded closer ties in return. Vale, these shifts weren't just policy tweaks. They were survival moves in a new energy Cold War. Ever wonder why strategic petroleum reserves became a thing everywhere? Post-79 panic, nations stocked up hundreds of millions of barrels underground, from America's 1 billion barrel SPR goal to Japan's massive imports buffer. This buffer aimed to buy 90 days of breathing room during disruptions, forcing producers to think twice before embargo games. Non-OPEC suppliers like Norway and Britain ramped up North Sea gushers, diluting the cartel's chokehold from half the world market to a third by the 80s. For you, it means diversified supply chains today keep prices from exploding like back then. Nuclear power got a huge push too, right? Countries like France went all in, hitting 70% nuclear electricity by the 90s to slash oil imports and tame bills. Carter had installed solar panels on the White House as a flashy green signal, but Reagan yanked them off in 1986, calling it a joke while deregulating oil and gas. This free market swing spiked production, crashing prices to $10 a barrel by 1986 and busting OPEC quotas. Pause here. Doesn't this flip from conservation mandates to drill baby drill sound familiar in today's energy debates? Geopolitically, the shocks birthed odd bedfellows. The courted Saudi swing production deals, while Europe built the Yamal pipeline anyway, risking Moscow dependence despite warnings. Iran-Iraq War from 1980 only muddied supplies further, with tankers hit in the Gulf, spiking insurance and reroutes. Reagan's team armed both sides quietly at times, prioritizing flow over ideology to avoid another crisis. You're left pondering, with drones and sanctions now, are modern Gulf flare-ups any less risky for your portfolio? These quakes also sparked conservation revolutions at home. Japan, import-dependent, mandated efficiency standards that slashed oil use per GDP by half, proving smarts beat barrels. CAFE standards forced automakers to slim gas guzzlers, birthing efficient rides despite Detroit gripes. Airlines refitted jets for fuel sip. Factories swapped oil boilers for coal or gas. Bueno, sigamos. Everyday folks changed habits too, carpooling and thermostat tweaks that stuck as culture. Could you picture dialing back your SUV for similar shocks today? Alliance shuffles extended to tech races. Coal gasification and shale experiments boomed with billions poured in, though many flopped as prices plunged. The 80s oil glut humbled OPEC, with Saudis flooding markets to punish quota cheats, regaining swing status by decade's end. US Saudi pacts stabilized flows but sowed seeds for future dependencies. Think about it. Every petrodollar recycle into treasuries tied economies tighter, for better or worse. By the late 80s, the landscape looked transformed. Reserves filled, non-OPEC output at record highs, nuclear grids humming, and efficiencies embedded deep. Yet vulnerabilities lingered, as Gulf War 90 proved with price spikes. Carter to Reagan pivots, from moral equivalent of war speeches to market deregulation, reshaped policy playbooks forever. For your world, it screams diversification. Don't bet your nest egg on one energy horse. These geopolitical tremors didn't just pass, they echo in every LNG terminal, EV charger, and sanctions tweet today. Nations learned energy is power's underbelly, alliances fluid as oil slicks. So next time headlines scream supply crunches, recall how 73 and 79 flipped the board. Get comfy, because the finale ties it all to your future moves in this shaky energy game. We've ridden through the wild oil shocks of 1973 and 79, feeling every price spike and geopolitical twist along the way. Now, let's pull it all together and ask, what forever changes did these quakes carve into the world's energy playbook, and how do they echo in your life today? Imagine if a single cartel or revolution could still jack up your gas bill overnight. Sound familiar with today's headlines? Get comfy because we're unpacking the big takeaways that shape your wallet and the planet's power grid right now. First off, efficiency became king after those crises forced everyone to rethink waste. Cars got lighter and thriftier thanks to rules like America's CAFE standards, slashing fuel use per mile driven by over 50% in a decade. Factories swapped oil guzzlers for smarter tech, and homes insulated better to fight heating bills that had doubled. You're living this legacy every time you fill up a modern ride that sips instead of gulps. Those shocks birthed the conservation culture we take for granted. Without them, your tank might empty twice as fast on the same trip. Diversification exploded too, with non-OPEC fields like Alaska's Prudhoe Bay and Britain's North Sea flooding markets to break the cartel's grip. By the mid-80s, OPEC's share tumbled from half to about 30% of global supply, stabilizing prices through sheer volume. Nations built massive strategic reserves, stocking hundreds of millions of barrels to weather storms without panic buying. Think about it. Next time tensions flare in the Gulf, that buffer keeps pumps flowing steady, protecting your budget from wild swings. Vale, no more total blackouts from one bad actor. Nuclear and alternatives got massive boosts as oil imports scared leaders straight. France cranked nuclear to 75% of its power mix, ditching fossil dependence cold turkey. Carter's wind and solar pushes, even if Reagan dialed them back, planted seeds for today's green boom. Japan mastered efficiency tech while chasing coal and LNG from places like Indonesia and Qatar. You're seeing the payoff in cheaper renewables now. Those crises lit the fuse for the energy mix we chased to dodge carbon taxes and import traps. Geopolitics learned hard knocks, birthing doctrines like Carter's that treat Gulf oil threats as national security red lines. The '90 Gulf War tested it when Iraq's Kuwait grab spiked prices to $40 before coalition forces smashed the play. US, Saudi packs recycled petrodollars into treasuries, tying economies tight but volatile. Ever wonder why sanctions fly fast at rogue producers today? It's the ghost of embargoes, past whispering that energy security trumps ideology every time. Your investments feel it in every commodity ETF twitch. Stagflation scars rewrote economic Bibles too, proving supply shocks laugh at old inflation unemployment trade-offs. Central banks like the Fed under Volcker hiked rates to 20%, crushing the wage price spiral but sparking recessions. Supply-side fixes, tax cuts, deregulation gained cred over Keynesian spending sprees. Today, when oil jumps, watch how policymakers balance growth without reigniting 70s-style messes. It keeps your job market steadier amid energy hiccups, even if groceries sting a bit. Fast forward, and these lessons fuel the EV revolution and shale fracking boom. America's shale unlocked over 10 million barrels daily, flipping it from top importer to exporter by 2017. Renewables like solar panels cost 99% less per watt since 1979 thanks to crisis-sparked R&D. China dominates batteries now, echoing how Japan grabbed efficiency tech back then. But here's the kicker. Despite all this, oil still rules 80% of transport. Your SUV or plane ticket proves diversification's half done. Risks linger like shadows, right? Climate regs push carbon pricing that could mimic oil shock inflation without the barrels. Geopolitical wildcards, Russia-Ukraine cuts, Iran sanctions remind us supply chains stay fragile. Smart plays might eye diversified energy stocks or efficiency hacks. But remember, this isn't investment advice. Markets carry risks, and you do your homework. Pause and ponder. With EVs rising and fusion whispers, are we finally shaking off OPEC's tremble or just trading one volatility for another? These twin crises didn't just hike prices. They rebuilt how nations chase, use, and secure energy forever. From thriftier cars to nuclear grids and reserve stockpiles, your daily life rides their waves. Next time you gripe at the pump or cheer a green breakthrough, tip your hat to 73 and 79. They taught the world to never sleep on black gold again. What's your biggest takeaway, or how's energy drama hitting your wallet? Drop it in comments below. Let's chat.